Alaska, spring 1977. The mountain was called Granite Ridge, though locals said it was more ice than stone. It rose above the Wrangell Range like a frozen sail, 1,000 feet higher than any map admitted, its face known to crack apart without warning. Only a handful of climbers ever tried it. Most never came back the same. On May 12th of that year, 4 mountaineers, David Price, 28, Alan Foster, 30, Marion Mare Klein, 27, and Eli Wexler, 32, set out from Anchorage in a rattling pickup loaded with ropes, canned food, and a borrowed two-way radio. They were all part of the University Alpine Research Club, chasing what David called the last clean summit in North America. They were young, confident, and utterly unprepared for how quiet the world could become at 10,000 feet. The plan, their route notebook, later found in Anchorage, laid out everything in neat columns. May 12th, drive to Chitina. Overnight. May 13, charter bushplane to Granite Base. May 14 to 16, establish Camp 1, ascend Southern Ridge. May 17, push to summit. May 19, radio base for pickup. Everything after that was blank. They weren't amateurs. David had summited Denali twice. Mare had a reputation for precision. She carried notebooks labeled weather and snow behavior. Alan was the team's anchor, cautious but loyal. Eli, the oldest, a Vietnam veteran turned guide, was supposed to keep them grounded. He didn't believe in luck, only planning. On May 13th, the bush pilot, Carl Madsen, dropped them near a glacier tongue half a mile from Granite Base. He watched them unload gear, waved once, and turned the plane toward the horizon. He would never see them again. The disappearance. When Carl returned 6 days later for pickup, clouds blanketed the ridge. He circled twice, radioed on all channels, no response. The base tent was gone. Flattened by snowdrift. At 11:22 a.m., his fuel gauge forced him back to Chitina. He tried again the next day. The ridge looked different, scarred by what he later described as a white river frozen mid-roar. Something had collapsed. He reported the missing team that night. Search and rescue arrived 2 days later. Alaska state troopers, local rangers, and 4 civilian climbers who knew David's group personally. They hiked in from the valley floor, fighting through waist-deep powder. Visibility was 30 feet. On the 3rd day, they found rope fragments and a tent pole sticking from the ice, snapped clean. The next morning, the storm returned. By May 25th, with wind gusts above 80 miles an hour, the mountain had erased every sign of life. The official statement read simply, 4 climbers presumed lost to avalanche between May 16th to 19th, 1977. Recovery not possible. Their families were told the glacier would keep moving downhill, burying everything under hundreds of feet of new ice. The mountain, one trooper said, had swallowed them whole. The families back in Anchorage, the news barely made the second page. There was a pipeline explosion that week. Headlines were already full. But among climbers, Granite Ridge became legend, a ghost climb. David's wife, Laura Price, visited the ranger station every year until she died in 2001. She'd bring a thermos of coffee, hand out Polaroids of the team, and ask the same question. If the ice melts, will someone call me? Mare's parents built a memorial cairn near Valdez. Alan's brother named his son after him. Eli's mother refused to believe her boy was gone. She wrote letters to the U.S. Geological Survey, asking for satellite images, saying she dreamed of him standing in sunlight above blue ice. The agency never replied. In 1985, a pair of climbers reported seeing bright metal glinting in the glacier face near Camp 1. When rangers investigated weeks later, the snow had buried it again. The rumor fed itself. A lost tent, a buried camera, a frozen camp trapped just below the surface. The mountain moves. Glaciers don't sleep. They crawl. Every year, Granite Ridge shifted lower by a few meters, grinding rock and memory alike. By the 1990s, scientists called it one of Alaska's fastest-moving ice rivers. Its surface buckled like ocean waves, white one season, turquoise the next. In 1997, a geologist team drilled cores near the same valley. Their notes recorded subsurface anomalies, possible metallic readings at 46 meters depth. No one connected it to the 1977 expedition. Locals still spoke of voices in the wind, the way storms built without warning around the ridge. Hunters left offerings, small stones, bits of cloth, at the trailhead sign reading Granite Ridge, elevation 12,403. They said it was for luck, or respect, or both. The forgotten film. Among the items David had packed was a Super 8 camera. The film, if ever found, would have been priceless. One of the last analog mountain expeditions before GPS and digital imaging changed everything. Ben Foster, Alan's nephew, spent years writing to agencies asking if any wreckage had surfaced. The answer was always the same: no recovery, no debris, no evidence. By 2010, the case was classified as inactive historical loss. The glacier kept moving. The thaw 50 miles away, climate scientists at the University of Alaska Fairbanks began monitoring Granite Ridge as part of a project on glacial retreat. Each summer, they sent drones to map melt patterns. Over 10 years, the data showed the glacier thinning by nearly 30%. Entire ridges that hadn't seen sunlight since the 1970s began to emerge, dark stone streaked with ice melt. In July 2023, a graduate student named Hannah Lee noticed something odd in the drone footage. At the glacier's terminus, where meltwater carved a deep channel, a small cluster of rectangular shadows appeared under the ice. Not rocks. Too symmetrical. She enhanced the image. Metallic sheen, straight lines. She zoomed closer until the screen blurred with noise. Then she saw it, a faint red triangle, a tent corner, and beside it, what looked like the curve of a helmet. Hannah froze. She checked coordinates twice, cross-referenced them with historical maps, then opened the old mountaineering database. Granite Ridge, May 1977. 4 missing climbers, never recovered. Her supervisor, glaciologist Dr. Ray Kendrick, pointed out the pattern: 4 distinct objects aligned in a semicircle, 47 meters from the surface. His voice dropped. "That's a camp," he said. They contacted the Alaska State Troopers the next day. Return to Granite. On August 3, 2023, an interdisciplinary team, scientists, park rangers, and forensic specialists, flew by helicopter to Granite Ridge. The glacier was unrecognizable, streaked with meltwater channels, dotted with blue pools. The air smelled of minerals and old snow. At 8,000 feet, they landed on a rocky ledge overlooking the glacier mouth. From above, the campsite was weak later with thermal cutters and steam equipment. The plan was to melt downward 2 meters at a time, while maintaining structural integrity of the site. Every cut revealed new color: white, then blue, then darker blue, then brown. By day 3, the first object surfaced: an ice axe, wooden handle still varnished, initials burned into it, DP. They set it carefully on a tarp. By evening, the drone captured the outline of a collapsed tent buried beneath clear ice, fabric frozen mid-flutter, like a flag caught in time. Inside, barely visible through the crystalline shell, lay the curve of a sleeping bag and the unmistakable shape of a boot. Dr. Kendrick stood in silence for a long time. "It's not just evidence," he said finally. "It's a time capsule." As darkness fell, the glacier crackled and groaned, ice fracturing under its own weight. Rangers retreated to base camp. They would return in the morning to finish the excavation. That night, Hannah Lee sat outside the tent with her laptop, scrolling through the drone feed again and again. She zoomed in to the central glint, the gold object between the sleeping bags. It was small, round, and familiar. the brass lens of a Super 8 camera. She exhaled sharply. "We're about to see 1977, she whispered. The glacier, silent for nearly half a century, had begun to give back its story. The first cut came at dawn. Steam hissed across the glacier as the recovery team worked in silence, melting down through 47 years of frozen time. Each layer peeled away like pages from a sealed book. The air smelled of minerals, metal, and something older, like dust that remembered breath. At 6:43 a.m., one of the technicians, a quiet man named Harris, paused and lifted his head. Through the misted ice below, a strip of red appeared. He brushed with a gloved hand, and the fabric moved like skin thawing. "We've got them," he said. Everyone stopped. Dr. Kendrick ordered all equipment powered down. They switched to handheld tools, carving a narrow trench until the first tent emerged. It was flattened, but the nylon still showed its color. Crimson, faded to rust. Inside, a sleeping bag lay half open, a human form pressed against the ice, face turned toward the light. Frost had preserved everything. Strands of hair, a silver ring on the left hand, the corner of a photograph tucked into the bag's flap. When the ice finally released, it wasn't decomposition that came out. It was silence. They moved methodically. A second tent appeared 2 meters away, then a third. The layout matched a typical 1970s alpine camp, each shelter positioned to break the wind for the others. Between them, half buried in ice, stood a tripod. Attached to it was a Super 8 camera, its brass lens dulled but intact. The roll of film inside was still sealed. The scientists treated it like a relic, sliding it into a humidity-controlled case before moving on. By noon, the final body was free. They laid all four side by side on insulated tarps, faces still peaceful, clothes faded but entire. Ranger Hale stood watching, his breath the white cloud. 47 years, he murmured, and they still look like they're waiting for sunrise. No one corrected him. Each climber had something personal preserved against them. David's ice axe, initials burned into the handle. Mare's notebook, the pages fused together, but still faintly blue from pen ink. Alan's compass, frozen open, needle locked pointing west. Eli's wristwatch, cracked, but readable, 6:58 a.m., May 17, 1977. The avalanche must have hit within minutes of that mark. The team packaged everything in temperature-stable crates. Though it worked until the glacier began to groan again, the sound deep and hollow, warning them to move. Helicopters lifted off at sunset, carrying 4 lives back into a sky they hadn't seen since disco played on radios and nobody had heard of GPS. 2 days later, the remains arrived at the State Forensics Lab in Anchorage. The news spread fast. Headlines read, "Alaskan Glacier yields lost climbers after 47 years." Families who had lived entire lifetimes in absence were suddenly thrust into spotlight. Reporters camped outside Laura Price's old house, though she'd been gone for decades. Her niece, Sarah, gave a short statement. "My aunt used to say, the mountain borrowed them. I guess it finally returned the favor." Inside the lab, specialists worked carefully to separate clothing and gear. DNA confirmation was almost immediate thanks to preserved tissue. Forensic temperature models showed the glacier's core never rose above -5 Celsius for all those years, halting decay. It was as if time had agreed to pause. When the camera's film cartridge arrived, the technicians hesitated. Old film stock could crumble if exposed to air too quickly. They placed it in a humidity chamber, gradually raising temperature over 30 hours. The reel unspooled without breaking. The images it held were dark at first, barely visible. But as they digitized frame by frame, color bled back in. Reds, whites, the impossible blue of sky untouched by smog. The footage began with laughter. The team hiking across snowfields, Mare waving her gloved hand at the lens, Alan pretending to fall backward into powder. David adjusting the tripod, Eli checking his altimeter. They looked impossibly young. Sigma. 4 people who hadn't yet learned that memory can freeze harder than ice. Then the image shook. Wind. Whiteout. The camera tilted, showing the tent flapping, snow blasting sideways. Voices rose. David shouting instructions, Mare laughing nervously, Alan saying, "It's fine, it's just wind, it'll pass." A low roar built under the sound, steady, growing louder. Someone yelled, "Move," and the frame turned to chaos. Snow swallowing light, a blur of red, then black. The reel ended there. When the clip reached that last second, no one in the room spoke. Dr. Kendrick turned off the monitor. "They filmed their own ending," he said. The technicians nodded, one wiping her eyes. Later, when the footage was shown to surviving relatives, no one cried the way the reporters expected. They watched quietly, almost reverently. Eli's mother had passed away long ago, but his nephew attended in her place. He wasn't scared. The man said. He was helping. That's who he was. The video became the anchor for a National Park Service documentary later that year, but only short fragments were used. The laughter, the sunlight, the beauty before the storm. The avalanche sequence stayed sealed in archives by family request. Meanwhile, the scientific results from the site painted a remarkable picture. The glacier's flow had slowed in the late 1990s, essentially preserving the camp in a stable layer of compressed ice, moving less than 3 centimeters a year. When climate warming thinned the upper crust, notewater channels carved directly down to it, revealing the tent walls like photographs developed by heat. It wasn't chance, it was geology doing what grief never could, making old things visible again. Ranger Hale returned to Granite Ridge 3 months later to place a temporary marker at the site. The glacier had already shifted, collapsing the melt cavity into a new ridge of white. He hammered in a small stake with an aluminum tag. Camp, 1977, recovered August 2023. As he finished, wind swept across the ridge, carrying the scent of thaw and snow. For a second, he swore he heard voices. Laughter carried thin and distant, but when he looked around, only the helicopter waited. Back in Anchorage, the 4 climbers were laid to rest together in a shared plot facing the mountains. The ceremony was small. Snow fell lightly, melting as it touched the caskets. Hannah Lee attended with Dr. Kendrick, standing at the edge while the families said their goodbyes. Someone played a cassette recording of a 1970s folk song, the same one Mare had written in her journal lyrics for. It drifted over the crowd like a benediction. When the priest finished, Hannah stepped forward with the Super 8 camera in her hands. She placed it gently atop the shared stone marker. "They wanted to see the summit," she said softly. "Now everyone can." That winter, she edited the drone and film footage together into a 12-minute short called The Glacier That Remembered. It premiered at a local festival in Fairbanks and spread online within weeks. Viewers around the world watched the recovered images of the 4 climbers smiling against the untouched snow, the title card fading to black over the sound of wind. The final line on screen read, "They went where maps end and memory begins." The glacier where they were found has continued to retreat. Every year, new sections of rock appear, and each time, someone wonders what else lies beneath. For Hannah, it became her life's work. She now monitors every major Alaskan glacier, using the same satellite technique that first revealed the camp. "The ice keeps secrets," she said in an interview, "but it also keeps promises." Sometimes when she returns to Granite Ridge, she camps near the same valley where the helicopter landed that day. At night, the mountain glows faintly under aurora light. The ice cracks, echoing like distant applause. She imagines them still up there, 4 silhouettes against the ridge, forever in the half-light before the storm. The last entry in Mare's notebook, preserved enough to read, had been written the night before they vanished. The ink trailed in places, but one sentence stood clear. The glacier sings sometimes. I think it's the sound of time moving past us. Now, almost half a century later, the mountain still sings. And somewhere beneath its cold breath, the four who climbed too high remain part of that song, their laughter preserved in the frozen air, proof that the earth forgets nothing. It only waits to be heard again. Winter had already returned to Granite Ridge by the time the documentary aired on national television. The glacier, half melted just months before, had sealed itself again under a new crust of snow. Wind howled through the valley, erasing the footprints left by the recovery team. Only a small aluminum marker protruded from the ice now, catching moonlight like a signal. Locals said it looked like a candle. From a distance, it did. In Anchorage, the story no longer belonged only to scientists or mountaineers. It had become something larger, an echo that reached people who had never seen a glacier in their lives. Letters poured into the park office. Teachers requesting footage for classrooms. Families writing about loved ones lost to avalanches. Climbers confessing that they'd once turned back from summits because of that film. Hannelby read them all, sometimes late into the night. She said the messages sounded like the mountain speaking in many voices. The four climbers' names were engraved together on a bronze plaque installed at the base of the Wrangell trailhead. Beneath them, a single inscription read, "They climbed as one, they rest as one." Visitors left offerings, stones, paper cranes, small thermoses of coffee that steamed in the cold air before freezing solid. Someone even left an old cassette player, the same folk song from Mayor's Journal playing on loop until its batteries died. The rangers didn't remove it. They said it sounded right, there. For the families, the decades of not knowing had finally resolved into something quiet. Alan's brother, now in his 70s, brought his grandson to see the memorial. He pointed toward the ridge and said, "Your name comes from a man who never stopped climbing, even when the world forgot where he was." David's niece brought a jar of snow home to Seattle and kept it in her freezer beside family photos. "It'll melt eventually," she told reporters. "That's okay." So did grief. Dr. Kendrick retired that spring. He gave his final lecture at the university, showing side-by-side images of the glacier in 1977 and 2024. The difference was shocking. Half its mass gone, a valley carved where once there had been nothing but ice. "Climate gives and climate takes," he said, "but it also reveals. Sometimes the earth waits until we're ready to see what it's been hiding." At the end of his talk, he dedicated the presentation to the four climbers. The students stood in silence, then applauded until the lights dimmed. That same month, Hannah led a new expedition back to Granite Ridge, not to recover anything, but to place a data beacon near the original campsite. The air temperature dropped to -20 by morning. She and two assistants dug through powder until they reached the older ice. Beneath the snow, the glint of the aluminum marker shimmered faintly. She brushed it off and attached the beacon, sealing it with epoxy. When the wind picked up, she paused, closing her eyes. "If you can hear me," she whispered, "we're still listening." The radio crackled, static blending with the moan of the glacier. She smiled, not sure if it was interference or an answer. That night, in their tent, the team replayed a snippet of the recovered Super 8 audio, the faint laughter just before the avalanche. Outside, the wind carried the same rhythm, a rising and falling cadence like breath. "Sounds like them," one assistant said. Hannah nodded. "It always will." Back in Anchorage, the footage was archived at the Alaska State Museum under climate history, not tragedy. Curators called it a dialogue between time and weather. Schoolchildren on field trips stood before the glass case holding the Super 8 camera, pressing fingerprints to its surface, staring at the frost still trapped inside the lens. A guide explained how cold can preserve everything: letters, faces, even fear. One boy asked if the people inside the film were still frozen somewhere. The guide said, "Only in the way stories are." By the following summer, tourism in the Wrangell Range had doubled. Most came chasing the viral images, 4 frozen tents shining under morning light, the gold camera lens gleaming in ice. Documentarians, influencers, and researchers trekked to the overlook. Rangers built new safety barriers, posted avalanche warnings, and quietly removed a handful of makeshift shrines that threatened to clutter the view. Still, they left one thing untouched: the small aluminum stake, hammered by hail, its letters weathered but legible. When asked why, the chief ranger said, "Because it's not a warning, it's a promise." Hannah's documentary eventually reached over 50 million views worldwide. Streaming. Comments ranged from admiration to disbelief. How can faces stay whole after 47 years? Nature is the best vault ever built. It's like they waited for us. The final scene showed sunrise creeping over the glacier while Mare's handwriting appeared on screen. "The glacier sings sometimes." That line became a symbol, printed on posters, t-shirts, even protest signs for climate marches. The phrase meant different things to different people. For some, it was hope. For others, a reminder that even the frozen world has a heartbeat. One morning in early 2026, Hannah received an email from a climber in Argentina who'd watched the film during a storm delay. He wrote, "Your glacier sings, ours hums. Maybe they talk to each other." She printed the message and pinned it above her desk, a small reminder that stories, like glaciers, flow unseen beneath the surface. Time moved on. The world found new mysteries. But every few months, another artifact melted out of the ice: a torn glove, a broken crampon, a dented cooking pot. Each one verified the accuracy of the recovered film. Each one proved that the mountain had held them exactly as they were. The final discovery came in September 2027, when satellite imaging detected a small reflective object near the glacier's edge. A retrieval crew found it embedded in meltwater, a metal thermos engraved with the words "Summit Coffee, May 17." Inside, perfectly preserved, were 2 paper photographs sealed in plastic, one of the team smiling beside their tents, another showing the sunrise behind the ridge. On the back, written in Mare's looping hand, were the words, "For whoever finds this, tell our families we were happy here." When Hannah read that inscription, she wept. The note ended any lingering question about fear or regret. They hadn't died running. They died living exactly as they wanted, chasing light at the roof of the world. The photographs went into the museum beside the Super 8, completing the circle. For the first time in half a century, the story was whole. By 2030, the glacier had thinned enough that its meltwater formed a new stream running through the valley. Scientists named it Klein Creek after Mare, though on most maps it simply reads 77 Tributary. In spring, it shines pale blue, clear as glass. Locals say you can still see flecks of red sediment washing through, tiny pieces of the tents that once slept beneath the ice. It's not proof, but people like believing it. Each May, the anniversary of their disappearance, the families and rangers gather at the trailhead. They pour coffee from metal flasks, stand in a line facing the mountains, and share silence. No speeches now, just breath fogging in the cold. When the sun hits the ridge, the snow flares gold. Someone always whispers, "They made it." No one argues. Afterward, they leave 4 stones stacked on the plaque, one for each climber, and walk back down without looking behind. That night, satellites orbiting above Alaska recorded a brief pulse of reflected light from Granite Ridge, a glimmer lasting less than a second, bright enough to register as an anomaly. The data report listed it as surface reflection anomaly, probable ice fracture. The technicians didn't know it matched almost exactly the coordinates of the recovered camp. Hannah saw the report later and smiled. "Let them call it what they want," she said. "I know who that was." Years later, school children still watch her film in science class. The narrator's voice fades as the final image appears. Four shadows stretching across snow, caught in a beam of dawn. Beneath it, the same words, etched into the memorial plaque, appear on screen. They climbed as one, they rest as one. Then the sound rises, the low groan of ice, the mountain breathing, the glacier's song. And somewhere between silence and memory, the four climbers remain suspended in that frozen music, eternal and weightless, waiting for anyone who dares to listen closely enough.